Shabbat Shalom. So what does a rabbi do after the final blast of the shofar on Yom Kippur? All right. To the degree that the Jewish people have a World Series, the high holidays are it, our fall classic. Not just Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur themselves, but the grueling weeks and months of preparation leading up to them. For the synagogue staff, tickets, membership, seating, emails, service time, security, AV, maintenance, far more than you or I will ever fully know, and for which we are all deeply grateful. For the cantors, rotations, rehearsals, music, collaborations within the synagogue and beyond, efforts by which we are all uplifted. For the rabbis, the writing, the messaging, the speakers, the orchestration of ritual life, all of it months in the making. Like a 162-game baseball season that culminates in pennant races and playoffs, only for the clergy, it all happens, and here I believe to be proof of God's dark sense of humor against the backdrop of everything else that's beginning in the fall, Hebrew school and board meetings and B'nai Mitzvah and much, much more. Affirming and thrilling as it is, it's also physically and emotionally exhausting. So what does a rabbi do after the final blast of the shofar on Yom Kippur? Well, I can't speak for every rabbi, but this rabbi, after evening minyan, to which I'll return, and the obligatory lox and bagel, after walking the dog, to which I'll also return, poured himself a single malt scotch and sat on the couch to watch the final innings of the deciding 3-game series between the Yankees and the Red Sox. And if you saw the game, you know it was no ordinary game. Yankees pitcher Cam Schlitter provided us with one of the greatest pitching performances in postseason history, shutting down the Red Sox in a 4-0 win. On only the 85th day of his in the majors, he became the first pitcher ever to throw 8 scoreless innings with at least 12 strikeouts and 0 walks in a postseason game. The most strikeouts in a winner-take-all game in history, the most in a playoff debut in Yankees history, the most he himself has ever thrown. Even more astonishing, he seemed to grow stronger as the night progressed on his 100th pitch, a 99-mile-an-hour fastball, a pitching performance for the ages. Spectacular as the game was, it was what Schlitter said in the post-game interview that stayed with me since. Having won the series and pitched the game of his life, he was asked how he felt, how he was going to celebrate, and what it meant to make history. His reply, in essence, was, well, tonight I'm going to enjoy the moment, but I need to knuckle down and prepare. We start a new series on Saturday, and I've got to go to work. We start a new series on Saturday, and I've got to go to work. That sentence spoken by Schlitter could have just as easily been spoken by this rabbi or really any rabbi. On one level, it's a reminder that whatever highs and lows, for that matter, we experience in life, in our professions, or our families, or our personal lives, the next day we return back to the grind. As the Scots say, back to old clays and cold porridge, meaning back to old clothes and cold porridge. Nobody stands under the chuppah forever. At some point, someone has to take out the trash, wash the dishes, or as seems to be my fate in life, walk the dog. It's our humble routines and realities, not the fleeting excitements, that constitute our lives. And on a deeper and not unrelated level, Schlitter's response signals not merely how life happens, but how holy living happens. The temptation is understandable, all the more so after Yom Kippur, to measure ourselves by the mountaintop moments. We were in synagogue, we said all the prayers, we beat our chests, we confessed our sins, we got all very reflective and introspective, and some of us even had those hard conversations in our families to fix that's been broken. We all feel pretty good about ourselves, and it's like a flu shot. We're good until next year. But that's really not how spiritual living or living itself actually happens. I mentioned the evening minyan following the shofar blasts. It's short and it's sweet, so everyone can get home quickly to break their fast. What's striking about that very brief service is that at 2 points in the service, we ask God again for forgiveness. It makes no sense. Everyone in the room has just spent the previous 25 hours pleading for forgiveness. Even if I had wanted to sin, when would I have found the time in the 3 minutes between the sound of the shofar and the beginning of that Ma'ariv service? Aside from the fact that people were pouring scotch as they prayed, why are we beating our chests and asking for forgiveness again? The answer, I would propose, is that even at that very moment, when we think or maybe even believe that we've achieved our spiritual peak, we declare ourselves committed to the climb. Like a runner who goes for a jog the day after a marathon, or a ball player who, having pitched the game of his life, is already thinking about the next game, or like a rabbi who writes his sermon the day after Yom Kippur, or like a congregant who listens to a sermon 2 days after Yom Kippur. Praying immediately after Yom Kippur and asking for forgiveness signals that our commitment isn't one and done. It's a Jewish and slightly more inspiring version, if you will, of the myth of Sisyphus. Not that we're condemned to keep pushing that boulder up the mountain, but rather that we see our lives as a sustained climb towards arriving at our aspirational selves. It is, the rabbis note, why our Torah reading begins as it does. Moses frames his final song, his last words of blessing to Israel, with a metaphor drawn from nature, but it's not with thunder and lightning, or the blaze of the sun, or the gust of the wind. Rather, let my teaching fall like dew. My words descend like gentle rain, steady, temperate, and nourishing. The forgiveness we ask for, the forgiveness we grant, the habits we form, these things gain power through constancy and repetition over time. Debbie and I visited a winery this past summer, and I remember our guide explaining that when wine is made, the grapes should not be pressed too quickly. That's not the way it works. Good things happen, transformations occur, and behaviors stick by way of patience, regularity, and care. That's how love works, as the poet Browning wrote, according to the level of each day's most quiet need, by sun and candlelight. And that's how life itself works. We are our best tell signs, the calls we make, the habits we keep, the kindnesses we extend. Do we think about the values of our loved ones only on their yizkers and on their yahrzeits, or do we champion their ideals as part of our daily routines? These things, and all things, are not measured just on holidays, birthdays, or anniversaries. They're measured best on the quiet days when nobody is looking. And it's also how Jewish life works. The rhythms of the Jewish calendar and the milestones of the Jewish life cycle give us those mountaintop moments when we can touch eternity and reach for our higher selves. the holidays as observed, b'nai mitzvahs as celebrated, weddings as sanctified, funerals as mourned. But as precious as they are, these moments only have meaning when they're anchored in the steady, faithful, day in and day out work of Jewish living. Judaism is no different than any other discipline. Anything I practice in my life that I'm good at, any relationship in my life that I hold sacred, any value that I hold dear, are such not because of rare flashes of brilliance, but because of daily devotion. If Jewish practice, Jewish community, and Jewish peoplehood are things that we value, then they are not things that we can tap in and tap out of according to the whims of convenience, convention, and calendar. There is no fairy dust in this world. You get what you give. In Jewish life, no different than in the rest of life. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel told the story about a town where one day all of the clocks stopped working. And despite the people's best efforts, they couldn't get the clocks to start again. Though many in the village were handy, there wasn't anyone who understood the inner workings of the clocks, the springs and the dials and the pendulums. And because they were secluded, years passed until someone wandered into the village who was quickly discovered to be a watchmaker. Quickly the town became abuzz, each bringing their own clocks, hoping that this stranger could fix them. One after another they lined up, hoping that the most important family heirlooms could be returned to working order. But soon each of the villagers met with disappointment. After many long winters and wet, weary summers, their clocks were too rusted to salvage. Yet, among all of the heartache and sadness, there was one person who did get good news. The watchmaker could fix her clock. Soon everyone was gathered around this lucky person, asking her the secret. Why could the watchmaker salvage her clock, but no other? When our clock stopped, I didn't know what else to do, she said. So I kept winding my clock each morning as if it worked, and that simple act of faith kept it from rusting over. The story is, I believe, a story about hope and a closing and, I believe, compelling argument for ongoing as opposed to intermittent observance of Jewish ritual. Earlier this summer, I met with a congregant who had suffered a terrible loss. She was asking all of the questions one would and should ask of God in such a dark moment. She called me last week, just before Yom Kippur. Despite her doubts, she had decided not to walk away. She stayed committed to ritual, even when God's presence felt most distant and perhaps least deserving. She shared with me how, most unexpectedly, most dramatically, and most wonderfully, she felt her faith return. In her observance, she felt the presence of God on her shoulders, a return she shared that would not have happened had she not kept at it and kept winding the clock. That which matters most to us is demonstrated not annually, but daily. We show we take it seriously by taking it seriously. If we want Judaism and faith to be there for us in the tough times, we need to practice it in the good times. If we want it to be passed down from generation to generation, then the power to make that happen is in nobody's hands but our own. The season of faith is a long one. World Series are thrilling, but it's in the at-bats and innings of everyday life in which the game is won. It's the Saturday, the Shabbat, after Yom Kippur. It's time to go to work. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for joining the Park Avenue Synagogue family. I hope you enjoyed the sermon. Please consider supporting our online community by scanning the QR code or by going to supportpas.org or by making a donation. Shalom, and see you in shul.